My name's Burton. I'm the Head of Libraries and Arts for South Gloucestershire Council. Our project was to develop a library policy based on the MLA standard charge, which would enable library service to maximise the contribution from developers in line with national guidance and planning obligations. So that was very simple, the project. The reason we went for this project was that South Gloucestershire had been fairly successful in getting Section 106 contributions from developers. And just to explain what Section 106 contributions are, when a developer builds houses, they are expected to contribute to the infrastructure developments of the council. So you build 100 homes, you should contribute to schools, to highways, libraries, community buildings and such. And it's always capital funding, there's very little chance of getting revenue funding. So South Gloucestershire has been fairly successful in getting these contributions, but when the MLA standard charge guidance came out, we realised we could get more. And also we were having an awful lot of problems actually trying to get the developers to actually give us the contributions. We were having to go to inquiries an awful lot of time. Every time we got an appeal, we were spending a lot of time. Whereas if we were able to develop a fairly robust policy that was accepted by developers and by the council, it would reduce the amount of time that we were spending on getting our contributions in. And the aim was to get the policy accepted both by the developers and by the council. And the reason that it was quite a good time to do it, the authority, like many other authorities in Britain, is developing what's called a core strategy, which is all the policies on planning for the council. And this goes out to public consultation, and developers and everyone else can challenge it. But at the end of the day, once it's accepted, it has a fairly powerful position within the council policy framework. We're currently receiving roughly about £60 a head. The majority of that is for buildings, but you can also get Section 106 contributions to pay for stock and also for IT. So so when you do get developers, you're expected to spend it on that. And there are some guidelines of how, when you get the money, how it must be spent. It must be spent on the library that's going to be affected by the development. You can't get the money and spend it elsewhere in the authority. That's a fairly key thing. And you have to demonstrate there is a need for the money. And then when you do get the money, you have to show that you have spent it on that particular development. So at the moment we're getting £60 a head, we can get £90 a head. So if you think about a development of about 1,000 houses, the average in South Gloucestershire is 2.3 people per house. So that's 2,300 people times 100. So that's worth about £230,000 for a fairly large development, which is a significant amount of money. And that can either be used to extend a library, or if you get a very, very big development, it potentially could be used to build a new library. But then the authority is expected to fund that to keep the opening hours, etc. going. So when we are bidding for development, we have to have that as the back of the mind. If we do get a new library, for example, could we actually fund it? And in the current climate, we've decided that we will go for extension to buildings rather than fund new libraries, and I expect that will be the common way forward for a lot of authorities as well. When we do get the Section 106 money, so the majority is spent on extensions, so we will work out how many square metres based on national guidance we should be building for an extension. So the recommendation we use in this document is 30 square metres per 1,000 population, and we use the guidance price of £3,000 per square metre. So and within the document and within the MLA guidance there are some very clear figures, and that's really helpful. So when you go to developers, you can say, this is how big the extension will be, this is how much it's going to cost, and that will go into the policy. But I think the other thing we did do as part of this policy, you do need some very robust evidence, because you do need to show who is going to use that library, and you do need to do some work on catchment areas. And libraries are fairly fortunate. We do compile and hold an awful lot of data. We know exactly who uses us, where they live, their age, etc. So we did compile a database to say when a development took place in a particular area of South Gloucestershire, we knew which library they would go to, and therefore when we put our bid in for the money, we could say, when you build this development, this is the library they'll use. We have got some spare land here which we will eventually use for an extension. But I think at the end of the day, you do need to be able to negotiate, because we've built a number of new libraries in South Gloucestershire, and obviously you wouldn't want to go ahead and extend them in 2-3 years' time. It'd be a waste of money. So you do need to be able to negotiate and be realistic about what you can expect and how you are going to use the money.
Right.
But we've used it for, as well as buildings, we've used it to buy PCs, and we've certainly used it for book stock. A lot of the money is used to improve our book stock. At the end of the day, it needs the developers has to agree to give the money, and sometimes the process is like most negotiations. We'll ask for a certain amount. They might come back and challenge you and say, we don't think that's justified for these reasons, and there's a to and fro, and eventually hopefully you will agree a reasonable amount. Ultimately, if you can't agree, it will go to a planning inquiry, and we've come very close to going to inquiry, and very usually at the last minute they will agree to your terms. But ultimately it could go to planning inquiry, and that's where your evidence needs to be absolutely robust to convince the inspector that you have got a strong case for the contribution. When we went about it, and this is quite useful for other authorities looking at the same sort of practice, you need staff who understand Section 106 contributions, and it's absolutely essential you work with your own planning department, either within your council or if you're a shire council within the district councils, because at the end of the day it's the planning department that has to go out and justify the contribution, and they're aware of all the policies. We're also fortunate in South Gloucestershire we had Martin Elson, who's an expert on this nationally, and he did write the MLA policy. So having that sort of group on board to take this policy forward was really helpful. But you can't just do it from the library section. You do need to bring in other experts and listen to them and take their views on board. I mean, I suppose a number of partnerships. There's the partnership with the developer, which can be a good relationship, because at the end of the day, you're developing a service that will enhance the development. If there's a good library, there's good community buildings, etc., it makes that development viable. It will want people will want to live there, and it makes the whole community, you know, more robust. So there are benefits to developers. The other thing, I mean, again, when we're looking at this, you need to know again what else is happening in that particular development, and it might be that you want to put the library in with a community centre, a school, or another shared building, and therefore, again, it's working with developers saying, well, we don't need a standalone library here. It's actually better to build up one building that will have both a library in and another facility. And I suppose the other partnership as well, and again this is becoming certainly an important aspect now, is partnerships with other authorities. You don't want to build a library right on your border when the authority next door has also got a library very close. So there needs to be a certain amount of understanding between authorities that you might end up giving another authority the money to enhance their building for your residents to use, because obviously residents don't recognise local authorities' borders. They will use libraries in other authorities. So you might want to give the money to another authority for them to develop their own library facility. The stage we're at now is that we've now got we've got a policy that is now going through the planning process, and that hopefully will be agreed in the next few months. And so that will help with South Gloucestershire, but also we're working on a model that other authorities can take the learning that we've gained from this experience and adopt it to their own authorities. The main problem we had in doing this policy was that it was a time of huge change. We did this during 2010, during which time we obviously had a new government, and all the policies we were basing our policy on were changing. The regional spatial strategy, which is the document that looks at the planning across the whole region, that went. Comprehensive area assessments that we were basing a lot of the evidence on, they were abolished. And obviously the whole budget issues kicked in, and that didn't make it very, very difficult to develop a policy when all the evidence you were basing it on were changing as you wrote it. And we actually went to version 25 of the policy before it actually got to the final stage. So it was an ever-changing background, but I suppose what we have got, even though some of the policies have disappeared, I think you can still use the evidence to say, well, this was cited as good evidence in that policy, even though it's not around anymore. You can still cite it because I think it helps with your evidence. The impact that the policies had is that it will mean that we can maximise our contributions from the developers, and it means we have funding to actually extend our buildings and react to change in population without having to use our own capital funding, which in the next few years is going to be very limited. I think there's three key areas. First of all, develop robust evidence. You must have the evidence to when you take your case to developers. Otherwise, they will blow you out of the water. So you should have it developed so it meets all the criteria. You know who's going to use the building, the cost, etc. So you need to hold all that. The second is talk to the planners. The planning, I mean, they're on your side, but you do need to be aware of where they're coming from. And finally, be prepared to negotiate. Even though you might end up with a standard charge, there are going to be local circumstances and you might have to negotiate. For example, they might be building an elderly people's home and the residents are not going to use the local library. Therefore, you cannot ask for a building extension for people that are never going to use the library. And there's areas like that where you just do need to negotiate and be sensible about it.